welcome everyone to the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation cybersecurity chat for today. Our guest today is Ted Arthur, who is a senior threat analyst working at FireEye, the world's leading cyber defense and intelligence company. He is also an instructor of cyber threat intelligence. He's going to talk to you today about what motivates your adversary. Ted, welcome, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Christine. Good afternoon, everybody. As was explained, I am going to give you guys a little bit about the motivations of the adversaries that we see in the threat space today. We have a bunch of adversary actors out there, and we'll go into what defines an adversary shortly. But we have to understand that their motivations aren't the same, and the motivations go a long way to help answer the who, the how, and the why. So we're going to talk about that. So first, a little bit about me. This is my TED Talk, because I am Ted Arthur. I first started in the United States Navy Cryptologic Service, so very closely tied with the National Cryptologic Museum, right there across from the National Security Agency, where the services and exploits of my brothers and sisters are clearly documented, and I highly encourage you to go check them out. So in a 10-year span, in the Navy, I worked as a cryptologist, doing chiefly SIG and intercept in my early days. I eventually moved over to this thing that was starting to percolate up called cyber. Nobody really knew what it was or how to do it. So they just started training the people who had some kind of aptitude. And I was one of those kids who worked on computers a lot in high school and came in knowing a lot of stuff already. So they threw me in what is colloquially known as the competency penalty box and told me to go do cyber. So I started cutting my teeth on defensive cyber operations, red teaming, moved over into offensive cyber operations. Shortly after September 11th, I applied for and got accepted to SEAL Team 6, where I did tactical cyber and information operations for them. Many theaters across the globe. I got out and then got pulled into the FBI to help them stand their cyber program up. And there's a fun vignette at the end of this that will explain how I got that job. I then moved over to the newly created U.S. Cyber Command, still right over there across the street from the museum, where they decided they needed a COCOM to do cyber, and that's what they came up with. Got to go and stand up the brand new Fusion Intelligence Cell there. From there, I got to work at DC-3, Defense Industrial Base, as well as the DICE, which is just down the street. I then kind of broke away from Big Gov and DoD and spent some time at the Department of Energy, which was very enlightening. You get to see some very amazing things out there. Do things like defending the nation's power grid, defending the nation's nuclear arsenal, and the development thereof. From there, I moved over to the Pentagon for a stint at PENCERT, which is the cyber incident response team. And then from there, I got recruited into FireEye, Mandiant, where I am now a principal intel analyst as well as a SANS instructor. Lest you think that the only thing I do is cyber, I'm also a big fan of rugby, running, biking, urban gardening. I live here in DC, so maximizing space for gardening purposes is pretty important. Gaming, the whole 9 yards. Volunteering, very important to being a well-rounded professional in any field. So I've been asked to explain how to get into cyber. There are a lot of different ways to do this. This is my way, so don't take this as gospel. Just take this as an example of how to get there. Many people go through college to go through this pipeline. Many people do not. A lot of people go into the military. Some people go straight into tech support and show an aptitude and move into cyber from there. So you'll see in the lower right, we have a roadmap that was helpfully put together by the SANS Institute. And I'll have a larger screen of that for you in a second. And it kind of can be used as a roadmap. I want to draw your attention to the upper right, that three-colored square, that rectangle there. This kind of covers how cyber is broken out. There are operations, basically how you run a network, how you make sure that Netflix is delivered to your home, that kind of thing. And then writing on that would be your DCO and OCO, or defensive cyber operations and offensive cyber operations. So in cyber, I work more on the defensive side, so I would live in this green space. So when we talk about what you do day to day, or the paths to this work, you can jump in anywhere along these disciplines that I've listed. You can jump in initially at forensics. Forensics are the actual bit and byte examinations of certain aspects of the operational or DCO, OCO cyberspace. Within forensics, we have things like host-based forensics, which is if it's on a computer or an operating system, you're going to know all about it. We also have network forensics, where you'll see flowing packets across the screen. You'll be able to analyze those, or even if you get good enough, read them in real time so you can tell me what's happening on the actual wire or in the airspace over a wireless network. And then there's the more intensive, hardworking aspect of this, which is malware or reverse engineering, which is to take a tool that an adversary uses to get access to a victim, and you can pull it apart, and you can actually show me the mechanics within the tool that would help me identify how it does it, what it does, who used it, who engineered it. Another way to get into this field is in red team. Red teaming is a fun thing that is equated to legal hacking. Essentially, once you do all these defensive options, you need a better way to figure out if they worked than to have a bad guy come in. So you would take a red team, you would give them legal authority to penetrate your network without hurting it, or maybe even hurting it a little bit, and then taking those lessons learned back to your defenders. And then finally, you can get into intelligence. You can either start here or move your way into here. There are differing schools of thought on which one is easier, taking a cyber person and working into intelligence, or taking an intel person and working them into cyber. My answer to that is it's all about aptitude and personality. To be a good cyber intel person, you really need to be curious. You need to be well-rounded. You need to have a desire to learn both disciplines. So one of the key aspects of being an intel analyst or officer, you essentially need to be an expert in just about everything. If there's a discipline in your field, you should know about it. If there is a cultural influence to the adversary that you're dealing with, such as holidays that might restrict or employ their operational cycles, there are different language patterns that can help you identify if somebody's a non-native speaker or is indeed a native speaker, things like that. This will also enable you to go to interesting places because you want to become more of an expert on the area or the people or the culture. But it also means that you're going to spend a lot of time in PowerPoint. So this is the training roadmap that I talked about earlier. I would say if you are serious about learning cyber, that using a roadmap like this, there's many out there, you can actually pull out the key elements of each discipline or each role and actually go and research them open source by yourself and teach yourself most of what we teach within SANS and even within military training. It is unregimented and it takes some time, but it goes to show you that there are no real gatekeepers or roadblocks to getting into this yourself. You could go home and do this right now. So we have to talk about what a threat is before we can actually talk about these threats. In this industry, we use something called APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat, which is usually, but not always, a military or intelligence service, usually of countries hostile to the US. But then again, if you were to be an APT intel analyst in Germany, those countries would change significantly. So this is about perspective. We also need to know what the threat is to accurately collect and use threat intelligence to defend against the adversary. And so we have to define that threat. And in the cyber world, we use the union of, or the overlap, the Venn, of capability, intent, and opportunity. And so if an adversary has the intent to deliver a capability and the opportunity to do it, that's where it lives, and that's where we'll do our analysis. So let's go talk about these threats. This is a case study from an actual investigation through multiple companies. It started back in January of 2010. What had happened is Google, which was quickly emerging to become one of the largest free email service providers on the planet, started noticing that there were some weird compromising of accounts within their enterprise. And rather than do what most companies did at that time, which was to keep a close hold and not tell anybody about it, they came out and they said, hey, these are the things that we're seeing. Using cooperative investigations from other places like Symantec and McAfee and Microsoft, they merged those technical details, and they came to find that a lot of the victims were aligned with Chinese human rights activists, were either actually serving as those or were supporting them. And it gave them the insight into this being a sustained campaign against people who would work against the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. They use these to tag, track, and persecute those individuals. At the same time, that effort was used to leverage against other intrusions. They found that these campaigns that were being seen at places like Northrop Grumman doing military support, Morgan Stanley for financial purposes, Dow Chemical for intellectual property, the same infrastructure was being used, which allowed us to identify Chinese intent that was being used clearly against their own state-sponsored, state security issues, was also being used to leverage outside attacks to get stuff, such as the weapons designs for fighter aircraft or new intellectual property. So in this case, we see state-sponsored cyber operations being used for state security. This is their motivation. So way back in 2016, there was a campaign that was observed by a company called Kaspersky, which they essentially observed about 100 banks in different countries. So no real overlap of one country or a subset of countries that would say, oh, hey, these are American-based banks, so there must be enemies of America doing it. There was no real pattern there. What actually happened is that they were attacking the infrastructure of banking systems, which is the SWIFT banking program, which is independent of the country. It just is used to move money. It turned out that after significant investigation, over $1 billion was taken from all of these banks in small sums over the span of several months. This was the largest bank heist in history and the largest cyber bank heist at the time. So here we see the motivation being using cyber for bank heists. It's just financial motivation. And we see that increasingly these days. So yet another example, a group called Hacking Team, which was an Italian firm based specifically in Italy, was providing surveillance and exploitation services to governments and law enforcement, and they used that as their cover for being a legal company. But what they were actually doing was offering those services outside of the law enforcement framework, and particularly to Eastern countries, which had fewer civil liberties or protections against civil liberty exploitation. In 2016, around July, about 400 gigabytes of data was stolen from this company's server and posted online. And we found that they were actually selling the tools and their services to tag, track, and prosecute dissidents, reporters who were critical of the host nations in violation of multiple laws. So here we see the motivation being commercial use or financial gain of that commercial entity of the cyber tools to do services for hire and violates civil liberties. This is going to be a two-slider. In December 2013, December 23rd, 2015, the Ukrainian energy grid, in a very small corner of it, was taken down in the middle of a Russian winter. And if you need an idea of what a Russian winter looks like, I've provided you a picture of Ukraine in the winter. It disconnected multiple substations. It resulted in about 150,000 customers not having power for a very short amount of time. But the objective was not really to freeze people. It was more to test their tactics and their tools and their procedures to see if it could be done. This was a very interesting scenario in which they actually used phones, because Ukraine is really not that advanced yet. So they used landline phones to completely denial, it's called DDoS, the central dispatch server. So nobody knew there was a power outage. They didn't know to actually go and respond to it. And then they, of course, went in, hacked the substation and shut off the power. So not to leave well enough alone, just about 1 year later, the Russians, an entity, because we try not to attribute before we have all the facts. Just about the same time frame, maybe a week or two earlier, one substation was impacted. It was less visible outage. They had fewer customers impacted, but the overall loss was about 3 times as much, just because they went up from a lower substation to a higher substation. The result was, while it was only a short time of power interruption, all the power breakers, which were controlled by a software interface, could no longer be trusted. The actual point of entry and the way they initially discovered this was happening is about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A person watching a screen had noticed his mouse tracking across the screen and going in and interacting with the individual power breakers to shut off power to these people in their apartment blocks. Right before the individual could go and disconnect his computer, he was kicked out. And that basically had told the operators that they could not trust their software. So they shut down all the windows and they made everybody drive out to the individual stations and turn them on and turn them off when they needed to be. This was an incredibly manual, labor-intensive process, which they had to do for 8 months through the winter. So in these 2 vignettes, we see the Russians trying to intimidate or influence their neighbors, who they have expressed a significant increase in, as well as an environment to test their tools for future operations. It could be said that the 2015 incident was training for the 2016 incident, and the 2016 incident, or both of them, could be used for operational testing for attacking the US grid, or maybe other Western countries. If you want more on that, Wired did a story, which you can see here on the slide, and it's available for free. So this one's a bit bigger, and we'll go into just how much bigger shortly. So in 2015, a reporter, German journalist, Bastian Obermeier, received a tip from a John Doe. He essentially dumped 214,000 documents, or more documents than that, but files from 214 separate entities across the globe, which showed signs or could tell a tale of avoiding tax sanctions, money laundering, etc. So this guy had, Mr. Obermeier, had a great deal of data on his hands, and he wasn't going to be able to do like a Control F look for Putin, right? So what he did is he tagged the ICIJ, or the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, to help him both validate the information and also divide and conquer it. So the ICIJ provided about 107 media organizations from 80 countries across the world, which brought language capabilities, which would obviously be needed, and started to divide and conquer this information. And this is an example of that. So how big are we talking? 2.6 terabytes of leaked data. And to give you an idea of what that is, a gigabyte is about 10 minutes of watching streamed video. So a terabyte is about 1,000 times that. So we're talking here 2.6 terabytes, somewhere around 500 DVDs stacked on end. So in this 2.6 terabytes, they had about 11.5 million files that included 4.8 million emails, 2.2 million PDFs, which required OCR, or a program to identify text so you can search that text, and then 1.2 million images. So what they did is they took open source software, put all of this data in there, and then divided it up among regions and handed it off to those individual teams. It took them the better part of a year, but it should be said that they successfully analyzed everything. They had no data leaks, so no tips to the people who were about to be investigated, and they were able to produce a report that showed the implications of major leaders around the world, both business and political leaders, and the network that supported them. And this is an example of what they produced. And this is only a very small example of what they produced. It essentially showed a network, in this example, a network of middlemen and companies that were hiding Putin's wealth, as well as relationships between Putin and other world leaders, or not exactly political leaders, but people he would not want to be associated with. So for the purposes of this vignette, the motivations were money laundering, evading taxes and sanctions, but it was also to start paying for people and services and things that you don't necessarily want other people to see. Now, this story comes with a little bit of a sad story. There were deadly consequences as a result of this investigation. On the 16th of October, roughly 25 minutes after she had posted her last blog post, her car was detonated in a car bomb. Daphne was one of the lead reporters for the Malta section of the Panama Papers. Evidently, they knew how to track her, where to find her, and when to find her, and those were the consequences of that. And this ties into what I was talking about earlier with Hacking Team, where there are companies who are offering their services for ulterior motives, and this could be one of them. So our last vignette I want to come into, this one's a little bit funny. Back in 2014, there was a group identifying themselves as Guardians of Peace, a hacktivist organization. What's interesting about hacktivist organizations is they usually have some kind of history or objective. This Guardians of Peace didn't seem to have either. They just seemed to pop up for the purposes of releasing some information that was hacked from Sony Entertainment. At the time, Sony Entertainment was producing a movie based on a stoner, Seth Goldberg, going to North Korea to interview and ultimately assassinate Kim Jong-un. Interestingly, the Sony attack also included system damaging software. So it started wiping all of the servers that it had stolen information from, and it had over time released the findings of actor salaries and projects in production currently. So there was very little supporting information to this being actual hacktivist organization, and it turned out that it was actually the NSA and FBI came out and said the motivations were purely because of the ego of their leader. Kim Jong-un wanted this movie to not see the light of day because it showed the fallibility of somebody who had been sold to his people as invulnerable. So what are the consequences of these actions? I told you about a bunch of bad stuff that happened. What do we do in response? Well, as you can see here, we have a fair amount of actual legal proceedings against some of the entities that were identified. On the right-hand side, you'll see these are just the DOJ actions for September against those who had cyber-related charges filed to them along the lines of espionage. We have thoroughly documented Chinese state-sponsored operators to such a degree that many of them can't even leave China or come to a Western-friendly country unless they be expedited. Up there, you'll see Julian Assange, who was famously the coordinator and operator of WikiLeaks, who is now awaiting charges. And additionally, right here in the bottom front, this is perhaps one of the most consequential examples of the consequences of cyber. Robert Hansen was a senior special agent in the FBI. And in fact, he was tasked with securing the FBI's networks back in the late 90s. And over the span of about 15 years, he was handing classified data over to the Russians to such a degree that it resulted in the execution of many of our agents. Directly as a result of his capture and how he was sneaking information out of the FBI, which was over a PDA, they started something called the Hansen Commission. The Hansen Commission sought to secure FBI and federal networks, as well as do insider threat to try to find these bad guys. And as a result of that, they created my job at the FBI, and just so happened to open up right about the time that I got out. So, with that, concludes my presentation, and I'd like to open it up to any questions.
What do you do to protect yourself from hackers identifying you?
Unfortunately, for somebody who's been in the business as long as I have, that ship has sailed a bit. I was part of the OPM compromise some time ago, in which all of the personal data of government employees was taken. My information is in there. I also have been a private citizen for some time, and part of my job is to kind of be in social media, to talk to other analysts, reporters. I'm an instructor for an institution. I've got a significant profile. Now, if I were to answer your question, how best to stop that? Get in early. Create yourself personas in which you can hide behind. Don't ever associate your personas to each other or to yourself if possible. If you have one email for communicating with family members or doing business, don't let that be your persona email address or profile. And try to try to look at yourself from the opposite side. So is this post in any way tieable to me or somebody else that I know? That's something that I would do. I would also focus on at-home security, because even if you have these personas built up in front of you, if they manage to compromise the system or infrastructure from which you're managing these personas, they'll find you out pretty quick. And that's something that has been done in many investigations. So very good software at home. I use McAfee. We also have some stuff provided to me by my company. It's not too expensive. You can put plenty of devices on it to include your family. And your mobile handset. So I have the same software running on the machine in front of me as I do on this handset. And then you also want to pay attention to your operating system. Don't go anywhere you're not supposed to. Update your patches. Always click yes and install when it's a Microsoft patch. Never click yes and install if it's popped up from a browser. That kind of thing.
Are hackers getting more brazen in trying to get our information through other, not only through government sources, so to speak, but also through banks, like you mentioned earlier, and other avenues, other businesses?
I would say that they are not getting more brazen, but that's only because they were never not brazen. The price of admission for cyber operations has always been low. It doesn't cost much to get a laptop. It doesn't cost much to get an internet connection. And these days, it doesn't cost much to get a remote access tool or the like. So there was really no price for anybody to be cautious. The individuals who were cautious were the ones who were most capable, because they had more valuable tools, so they would, not want to lose them on a low return on investment operation. Additionally, it's just so easy to do offensive cyber operations for a lot of these people, which is like a majority of the vectors that we see are spear phishing. And it costs nothing to send a spear phish. So no, they're not more brazen, but that's only because they have no reason not to be. Yes, they are absolutely going to attack you on every front that they can. If you have it, if it has a bit or a bite, they're going to try to exploit it.
I do have a question that was posed to me in another talk that I'd like to see your thoughts as well. And it kind of builds on that last comment that you just made. The constant attacks that are happening, especially the more sophisticated attacks. I know that we just got a new pastor at our parish, and already I'm getting an email from him saying, "Hey, I'm in a private meeting. I can't talk to you, but I need for you to do me a favor. Will you click on this and give me a hand?" So it's here within 2 weeks of him taking over. I'm now getting the spam from these attackers. Can you share with our folks who are on this call the really voluminous attacks and how that we really need to be careful and only even open emails and texts from folks that you're expecting it from, and even those you still have to be careful because it had his name on it. I just happen to know that that's not his email address, and I know how to check a header to take a look at that and find the telltale signs, but not everybody knows how to do that. So can you maybe expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, right you are. So it comes with a combination of security in depth. So that requires both your church to be aware of the transition. And at that time is a good time to do a self-assessment on your security. But it also requires vigilance at home. And it requires you to be able to look at things like URLs or, the address to websites and, kind of wait for a second and be like, okay, do I really mean to be going to Gmail with 2Ls.com? Like you have to be vigilant because these people know how to exploit humans. They are the weakest part of any network is the human. And so it's up to you as a user, whether you happen to be working for a company, government agency, or just yourself, to do the extra work, pay attention to what experts are telling you, to pay attention to the low-hanging fruit around you. So the email that comes in, make sure that that's actually that person's address. If you're not expecting somebody to send you a birthday card outside a cycle, maybe we don't click on that. Almost nobody should be sending you links that you don't know. If they're sending you links and you didn't expect it, it's like if you're setting up for a job interview or if you know that there's going to be a baby born at some point, expect those. But if you didn't apply to a job, we're not clicking on that. like I told you before, safe and secure at home. So even if you do accidentally mess up and click a link, McAfee hopefully will be able to pop up. And I'm only saying McAfee because I use them. There are plenty of very good services. And you, with the layered defense, if you mess up, something else will catch you, hopefully. This also talks about, gives word to like what happens when you become compromised. And you can actually build defense in depth before the compromise with things like not having the same password across all of your accounts, not having the same login across all of your accounts. So this means you have to change things up and remember them. There are password managers to make this easier for you. But if you have homogeneous attack space where they can get one piece of information from you and use that to enter every single door, well, you've made things easier for them, right?
What is your opinion on VPNs?
They're good, but not all VPNs are equal. So you have to accept that VPNs are essentially you putting another potential collector in between you and your data. There are commercial VPNs that their lifeblood depends on their reputation, their ability to securely provide VPN services. Things like Nord or ExpressVPN. Good. Anything that you have to pay money for, but that you also see commercially available. Good. Tor, the onion router, also good. A little bit less defended. It doesn't guarantee you security like some of the others do, but it assures anonymity. We see a lot of our activists out of China or other places where they're being oppressed use successfully Tor, which allows them to look like other traffic or come out of other nodes and get access to stuff that the Great Firewall China is trying to limit. So your mileage will vary, and your not all VPNs are equal. So do your research, but they're great. They're not so great for some of the stuff that maybe some of your students be using, like getting access to streaming content from other places because you're trying to get around controls. They have learned that a lot of people were doing that, and it was bringing their servers to their knees, especially on big release dates of either games or movies or whatever. So they're starting to keep you from being able to do that, which means that the more permissive VPN services that allow you larger bandwidth are less secure. And some of them actually might be used for nefarious purposes because they know you'll access them because of the ease of access. So be careful. How about anybody who's trying to get into this line of work and thinks that it's not available to them?
So let me turn it around. So how can it be made available to students?
Be curious. With curiosity, you can start asking questions. With questions, you can start finding information. With information, you can start gaining knowledge. This isn't like going to medical school. The price of entry to medical school is a bunch of school before that, and then actually going to a physical institution so that you can get access to the experts, so that you can get access to the cadavers, so you can get access to the medicine. This isn't like that. Most of what you'll need to learn is on YouTube. I hate to break it to you, but I could probably teach a master's level course using only YouTube clips. Practice it in everything that you do. So some people will only go to the school lab and only do research and cyber studying there. That's not acceptable. I mean, it's acceptable, but if you want to put your best effort into it, you need to do things like have a couple computers at home so that you can connect to them and you can see how that connection looks. And you can start doing things like knocking on their door or putting up the fences and seeing what that looks like. It's very cheap. Most of it's free. And then the stuff that isn't free, it'll tell you what it can do. And you can say, okay, do I actually need that? Be hungry. Go out there and seek it. Start following people who do this. Go to SANS. There are a lot of people on Twitter who work for SANS who just give this information for free. There are a lot of blog posts and videos provided by SANS that you can go and just start consuming today. And what this will do is you'll start seeing the stuff that makes sense, and that's where your expertise is going to start to grow. But the stuff that doesn't make sense, you just stop right there, pivot to the internet, and then teach yourself about that one thing that doesn't make sense. And suddenly more stuff starts making sense. There are other services like internships are great. Internships are, especially with the Cryptologic Museum, NSA, schools in the Maryland area. You can go work for the CIA, the NSA, the NRO, the NGA, the FBI, starting at like 17. I worked with somebody at the NSA when I was there. She was probably 25, 24, and she had been there for 7 years. So that should give you an idea of what's available.
To just add to that, there are also For students that haven't noodled around our website, cryptologicfoundation.org, there are also resources there as well. And for teachers, there is actually a curriculum, especially if you're a high school teacher, there are actually curriculum guidelines for you to take a look at as well that we are currently piloting. So those might be additional resources as well. Any other parting words, Ted, for our students today?
Just understand that there's no gateway here. There's no gatekeeper. If anybody tells you that you must do certain things in order to get access, go find somebody else, because they're either misleading you or they want something from you. This is a field where your reputation rides with you. So be consistent in your behavior. Let that behavior be thoughtful and considerate. Know that your reputation can close doors to you in certain places because people just won't work with you. But we all work together and we all talk to each other, even though we work at different organizations or companies. And you better believe that anytime I've gotten a resume, I've asked the group if they knew anybody, if anybody knew that person, and if there was disparaging information, it was readily available. Be kind. We can use these tools for bad, and they frequently are. You're going to pick up a skill set that could honestly hurt or kill people, as I've demonstrated to you. It is your responsibility to use that responsibly and, where possible, lift up other people as you do it.
Thanks so much, Ted, for talking to our students today. Thank you all for joining us for our cybersecurity chat for today. I hope that you join us again next week. Until then, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.